This is ContactTalkRadio.com. Consciousness in action. And you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and Upsnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Welcome to Sex is Medicine, your number one resource for holistic sex education. I'm Devi Ward Erickson, and I invite you to join me every week for another enriching and powerful conversation about the intersection of sexuality, spirituality, pleasure, and personal growth. Each episode of Sex is Medicine is dedicated to awakening your heart and mind to the true purpose and power of human sexuality. Please join me on this journey of self-discovery as we explore the art of using pleasure as medicine to awaken, heal, and empower every area of your life. Sex is Medicine broadcasts every Thursday at 7 p.m. Pacific on Contact Talk Radio Network. You can listen to the replay and subscribe to Sex is Medicine on Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. And now get ready for another episode of Sex is Medicine. Hey everybody, welcome to Sex is Medicine. I am your host, Devi Ward Erickson, here with another episode of your number one resource for holistic sex education online. My guest this evening is the wonderful David Wraith, another person that I have been wanting to speak with for a very, very long time, and the stars finally aligned for us to have this conversation online. I think we're having a little Twitter conversation. And I was like, why haven't you been on my show yet? We need to share you with the world. And so I'm so delighted to share David with you. So I want to say that in my experience, having been in the field of sex education and holistic sexual healing for 13 years, there is a dearth of empowered Black men who are skilled and integrous sex educators. And you are one of those. So I am so excited to be sharing your wisdom and your glory with the world. And then when I read your bio, like, so fun. So I'm just going to read a little bit to the audience here so you can have an idea of what we're about to dive into. So David Wraith is a free-range polyamorous man whore, the self-proclaimed hardest working man in hoe business, and the do-you guru. I love that. Has spent much of his adult life advocating for women's reproductive freedom, gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender rights, and people living with HIV. Wraith is a writer, speaker, and sex educator with a degree in English from Webster University and a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from the University of Missouri in St. Louis. So what I want to ask you is, how do you go from a degree in English to being the hoe, the hardest working man in hoe business? What happened?
They weren't hiring at the English factory. They already had plenty of words, so I had to look up something else. I had to go to a different booth on career day.
So they had the hoe man factory going on at a career day booth.
Ended up hoeing. No, but seriously, I grew up I came of age during like the early days of the HIV epidemic. Yeah. And as a Gen Xer, I feel like we have a really strange relationship, a lot of us, to sex, because our parents' generation, a lot of them were, in the 60s and 70s, just getting their freak on. And if they caught anything, they went to the doctor, got a shot, they were done. By the time HIV cropped up, a lot of, the heterosexual baby boomers were already like married and having kids and thought, well, that's a gay man's problem. That's a single person's problem. And I feel like the generation that's coming up after us, like the younger millennials and Gen Z, they don't remember a world without HIV. Yeah. And a lot of them don't really remember a world without, antiretrovirals and PrEP and, long-term HIV survivors. So I'm old enough to remember a world before the HIV epidemic, but I'm not old enough to have been having sex in that world. So I came of age sexually at a time when, I feel like older generations thought, good old missionary position sex with a condom, without a condom, most natural thing in the world. BDSM, all this kinky stuff, that's dangerous. That's scary. when I came up, it was almost like, can you guys do something other than have sex? Like, can you, get creative and get your freak on, but maybe not have intercourse? And if you're going to use a condom. So growing up with that perspective, I was always interested in sex and sexuality, even when I was, studying to speak the King's English to the Queen's taste. And I joined ACT UP, AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, when I was 18. I was the youngest. I was the only heterosexual, and I think I was the only Black member of the St. Louis chapter of ACT UP. So I started doing like sex education and sex activism from when I was a teenager.
Wow.
And after like a decade of, with, ACT UP and Planned Parenthood and National Abortion Rights Action League, I kind of realized I'm doing this important work that I still do and that I still love, but it's all kind of reactionary to negative consequences of sex. It's reacting to an epidemic. It's reacting to unplanned pregnancy. It's reacting to the assault on reproductive freedom. I want to do something proactive. I think it was around this time that I just, Annie Sprinkle used to sell these buttons that said pleasure activist.
Mm-hmm.
And Davey, I tell you, just seeing the words pleasure activist together just flipped my wig. Like, you can be a pleasure activist. You can be an activist for sexual pleasure, not just mitigating sexual harm. And that really turned me around.
Wow. And so that began your exploration into the field of sex education, polyamory, nudity, clothing optional events. So let's talk about all those aspects. So you're wearing a t-shirt right now that says polyamorous as fuck. So once again, polyamory, controversial. There's been some TV shows about it, a lot of misinformation. And again, it's also a very typically white dominated conversation until very recently. So what is it to be what does that mean to be polyamorous? And then what does it mean to you as a Black man in the Black community to be polyamorous?
Well, for the hoes at home, to be polyamorous is to have multiple romantic and or sexual relationships. They can be both, they can be either, with the full knowledge and informed consent of everyone involved.
Okay, so it's not cheating.
It's not cheating. It's not being on the down low. It's not creeping. It's not being a backdoor man. It's being a front door man or woman or non-binary individual. And it's open relationships. It's ethical non-monogamy. It's basically just having more than one romantic or sexual partner, but doing it ethically with everyone's informed consent. As a Black person, being polyamorous, it's gotten a lot easier, I would say, in the past. I've really been polyamorous my whole adult life, even when I didn't have language, even when I didn't have a word for it. From the time I was a teenager, I was usually in multiple relationships, or if I was dating one person, they were in, another relationship. And this was before, Ethical Slut was published, and before Opening Up by Tristan Taormino, and before all these awesome resources that we have now. And growing up in the Black community, people didn't understand it, especially in the pre-internet days before I could find my people. Now, I'm in all these Facebook groups for, polyamorous people and Black polyamorous people. But, back in the 90s, I remember watching Real Sex on HBO, and they were doing a story about polyamory. And my mom sat next to me and she goes, "Are these people wife swapping?" And I'm like, well, I mean, they're wife swapping, they're husband swapping, they're swapping. It's called polyamory. And she did not get it. And I'm putting her business in the street, but she's been dead for 13 years.
Bless you,
she
Mom.
she was in a relationship with a married man most of my childhood, because her and my dad divorced when I was very young. And it just kind of bugged me out that she could wrap her mind around cheating because his wife did not know, but she couldn't wrap her mind around polyamory. When I graduated from college and I moved out of my mother's house, the only person I knew who had a pickup truck was my girlfriend's husband. And my mom knew I was dating the woman. And when she asked me how I knew the guy, I said, "Oh, that's her husband." And my mom was like, "David, how could you do them to move my furniture? And I'm like, Mom, he knows. And she just couldn't wrap her mind around people being ethically non-monogamous, but cheating was fine. And I feel like a lot of the Black community, and especially the older generation, my parents' generation and going back, they understood cheating, and they even understood like a kind of polyamory that dare not speak its name. Like, I'm 47 years old, and I'm still meeting new aunts and uncles that know that my grandfather had, other kids. And when that's my mom's dad. When my dad's dad died, and I go to the funeral, and I find out my grandmother was like the third widow from the left. I think Black people, we've understood a certain kind of ethical non-monogamy. We just didn't call it that. We didn't talk about it. It was understood, but it's not so much the sex, it's the openness that I think disturbs a lot of people.
Yeah. So it's been part of the Black community, but again, like you said, it's not obvious and exposed. It's covert polyamory. And like what you're saying, like, coming up in the 90s, it was like, if you have multiple partners, you're a player. Right. Exactly. That's the way that we are. You're a player or a hoe kind of thing. So it was done, but there wasn't the languaging around it. And so again, I'm a Gen Xer too, obviously, coming up on 47 as well. So like the climate today is so vastly different than when we were coming up sexually in the 90s. Very, very different. And so much has been invented. And I think by our generation, like some of the authors that you've pointed out are Gen Xers. So we're kind of like Gen Xers. We've been kind of like cutting edge and changing the game in terms of what it is to be sex positive and what it is, what sex education is really about. Yeah,
absolutely.
So where did you get your training? Like, how did you start getting educated about sexuality? I mean, aside from, so you were an activist, but when you had that reframe of the pleasure activist, where did you go for your resources to start learning on how to teach other people how to also be pleasure activists?
In these streets? No, just playing. No, really in these libraries, you know what I'm saying? Like Amazon.com, like I'm a very slow reader. Like I'm the worst read, English major in history, but I became kind of a voracious reader of sex positive authors. And because it just struck a chord in me very early, because to me growing up, if you were kinky or polyamorous or a nudist or any type of alternative sexuality, let alone like gay or trans or queer, you were kind of an outlaw. Like it was equated to being a criminal.
Yeah.
And that really affected me. And I kind of felt like there was something wrong with me. Like I'm a criminal, like I'm a deviant. And it wasn't until I discovered, Susie Bright, Annie Sprinkle, Betty Dodson, Carol Queen, later Tristan Taormino, all these bisexual white women, either from like California or New York, all these like bisexual white women that I had role models who were, educated people, ethical people, who talked about all these deviant sexualities that I had equated with criminality or, wrongdoing. And so I went from feeling like I was broken and there was something really wrong with me to, okay, there are other people like me, but they're all like bisexual white women on the coast. And I'm this heterosexual, cisgender Black guy from the Midwest. So it's like, okay, where do I fit into any of that? But it was really reading those authors and a few more that really sort of brought me along on this path.
Yeah, praise God for bisexual white women. I'm just saying. Like how amazing. And so you bring up a good point, because when you were first breaking into the field, that was your modeling was these bisexual white women. So do you see yourself now as a model for other men and women of color in terms of, advocating for these deviant sexual behaviors?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of why I do what I do and I try to be vocal and visible, is because I want to be the person that I needed when I was younger. Because, I didn't have people like, you know, Milena Williams or Kevin Patterson or Delano. Like, I remember I went to a BDSM convention in Chicago in 2004, I want to say. And I saw a gentleman there named Delano who was presenting. He was a Black man. He was a rope bottom. He was a submissive, and he was presenting. And it was like, it just blew my mind, because everyone else who was a presenter was like a top or a dom. I didn't think subs were allowed to present. And then to see a Black man doing it, just like, just blew my mind. Like, I literally took home like a handout with a picture of him on it to my mother to like show her that there were Black men presenting on sexuality, that I wasn't like throwing myself into some weird environment of only white people that were going to like tie me up and kill me, because she was a little worried about me back then. So just seeing guys like that and Black folks like that, people like Milena, really just did so much for me. And I want to be that for other people, especially, and whether you're a gay Black man or a heterosexual Black man who doesn't fit into that, you know, the man box, as the folks that are called men would say, all of the, not just toxic masculinity, but just sort of stereotypical masculine expectations. If you don't fit into that, I want you to be able to see me and, you know, feel the way I felt the first time I saw Delano. Like, see yourself in me and feel empowered and feel like only one.
Yeah, beautiful. And so you teach such a wide range of workshops and offer such a wide range of educational experiences for people. And so one of the things that I noted on your site that you teach is a workshop about clothing optional and body love and body acceptance. So why and how is body acceptance important in the realm of sexuality?
Well, I think that a lot of us deny ourselves a lot of pleasure because we're inhibited in our bodies, because of those external messages that we've gotten from, you know, not just Hollywood and Milan and Madison Avenue, but our moms, our dads, our cousins, our brothers and sisters, our friends. Like, I always say, like, when you think about the worst thing anyone's ever said to you about your body, it may have come from a total stranger. It may have come from the mean girls in high school or guys in the locker room, but that's usually not the thing that hurt you the most. Usually the stuff that hurts us the most comes from mom, dad, brother, sister, husband, wife, partner, you know, someone intimate, whether they meant to hurt you or not, whether they thought they were having your best interest at hand in mind or not. And so we get those messages and they inhibit us, you know, even as, you know, sexual adults. And it stops us from doing a lot of the things that we want to do and that would give us a lot of pleasure. And so I think this applies to the most vanilla person, but even people in the kink community and the polyamorous community, even in the nudist community, you know, strange as that may sound, we're gonna be seen naked probably by exponentially more people than the average person. Or we have the opportunity to be seen naked and to have fun and to, you know, use and express our bodies. But I think a lot of us don't do it because we've been told we're not thin enough, we're not muscular enough, we're not pretty enough. You know, we have scars, we have marks, we have whatever. And so my initial sort of mission statement when I was probably in my 20s was I wanted to make the world safer for sex. Because again, I'm reacting to, you know, HIV and the assault on reproductive freedom. And when I was in my early 30s, I rewrote my mission statement to, I want there to be more orgasms on earth for my having been born. And not just the ones that I personally facilitate, but I want I want to help people have orgasms months after they took one of my workshops or read a blog post. People that I may never meet, I want to help them have better orgasms. And I think that loving our bodies, and accepting our desires and being a little more uninhibited than society has trained us to be just means more pleasure for us, more pleasure for our partners.
So when the means to an end is hosting clothing optional workshops. So I mean, is it hard to get people in the door for that? And once they're there, what are some of the things that occur that you've seen?
It's not difficult. It's actually, it's been my most popular workshop that I've offered, and no one's required to take their clothes off. I used to bring chocolates, and if someone asked a really good question or made a really good comment, I'd give them a chocolate as part of their participation grade. If they took an article of clothing off, I'd throw them a chocolate as part of their participation grade. And often these were like people who were my age or older, or closer to me in age. I did it once at Dartmouth University, or Dartmouth College, I should say. I did the workshop, and it occurred to me that all these people are like 18 to 22, and I was in my 40s. So now I'm the guy that gives chocolate to young people at school in exchange for taking their clothes off. But yeah,
your whole repertoire.
I'm that guy forever. I can't unring that bell. And I was worried about, because that was the first time I'd ever spoken specifically to college students. And I was really worried that these Ivy League kids were going to be judgmental, and, my 40-something-year-old ass was going to be butt naked, and they were going to be wearing their clothes and looking down their noses at me. But these college kids were just flinging their clothes off as soon as the workshop started. But so it's not difficult to get people to take their clothes off. And again, it's not required. It's clothing optional, not nudity required. And I start the workshop by saying, okay, who here is ready right now to get on stage in front of all these people, get completely naked and tell a story? And usually like a handful of hands go up. And I go, okay, let's see if we can beat those numbers in 45 minutes. I give my 45-minute presentation. I get completely naked. I give my 45-minute presentation, and then I say, okay, now who's ready to come up here, get naked, and tell a story? And just tons of hands. Usually we run out of time. I've actually shortened the presentation to allow more time for people to share. So when you lead by example, and when you give information to people that, again, who've been kind of brainwashed by society to be inhibited in their bodies, and create a safe and intentional environment, a lot of these people can't wait to get naked in front of a room full of strangers. And it's not just the nudity, but also people are terrified of public speaking.
Yeah.
So to be physically naked and get emotionally naked, which a lot of them do, it's amazing. I mean, I've cried. I've had people who were sharing cry. I've had people in the audience cry. Like, it can be very emotionally cathartic, especially for people who have trauma, to speak their truth and do it, like I said, physically naked and emotionally naked.
Yeah. So it sounds like many people are just waiting for permission. Yeah.
They're waiting for permission, and they're waiting for support, and they're waiting to feel safe, because parties, and a lot of people are terrified, even if they know that nudity is not required, they're terrified. And it's really about letting them know that they're safe, like no one's going to judge them, and so yeah, permission and that feeling of safety and support.
And then how have you seen this play out in people's lives after the workshop? So, I mean, that's like, it seems like, like breaking through a big barrier there. And then, so are there positive or beneficial repercussions that show up in their life later from taking the leap, doing the dive?
Yeah, well, so I've done the workshop locally in St. Louis, and I also throw lots of clothing optional events in St. Louis, or I did pre-COVID. Mm-hmm. And so I've gotten to see, just amongst my social circle, people who were very inhibited, people who said, oh, I can't do that, I'll never come to one of those. And now they're the first people to get naked, at a party. And when I take it on the road, because I've given this workshop across the United States and Canada, I get letters from people sometimes months later telling me how, it changed their life, which is, daunting to hear, but also really flattering, because, I do this to help people. And I've had people send me naked pictures of them, which is great. No complaints. Please keep them coming.
All right. So David, you get the thumbs up. You can send your naked pictures to David, your dick pics.
Absolutely. Once I had a journalist take the workshop and write an article about it. And I really don't know what she expected when she came in the door, but she got completely naked during the workshop and told this really harrowing story. And I think she had come there initially just as a writer. So yeah, I've gotten to see, both in my hometown and to some extent from people all around the country, how it affects them and how it carries over in their life.
So then post-COVID, are you going to go back to doing these clothing optional events?
Absolutely. Can't wait.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wanted to ask you about this one thing. So do you have the clothing optional events? Do you have any events where people like self-pleasure together, or what are you teaching at the clothing optional events? Is it, like I'm going to read Shakespeare naked, or what's happening?
Well, I mean, we did have one clothing optional poetry reading. That went really well, I thought. We've had clothing optional bowling. That got us a lot of press, but we haven't done another one because there's not a bowling alley in St. Louis that will return my calls now.
So really, so St. Louis is like, no, David Wraith, you need to take this show on a different road.
I think the press coverage is what.
I mean, that would be good for business. I'm just saying, that's good marketing.
It made it to CNN, and yeah, we kind of had a monster on our hands. We have had, not me, but I'm one of the co-founders of Sex Positive St. Louis. Mm-hmm. We've been around for 11 years now. We've had this thing called the Pussy Party, mm-hmm. Which I don't facilitate because I do not have a vulva. But I'm sorry to hear that. Some of the women in the group will lead the Pussy Party, which is, or I should say, well, there's all women in the group currently, but it's for people with vaginas and vulvas. And I don't think they do any self-pleasuring. St. Louis is a little behind the coast. Mm-hmm. It was kind of inspired by body sex. Mm-hmm. Shout out to the late Betty Dodson. But it's not as advanced. We've tried to push in that direction. I don't know that St. Louis is quite ready for that. Mm-hmm. We also have an event called the Penis Party, which, again, no self-pleasure, but it's people with penises. We sit in a circle on the floor. Women or people with vulvas sit on chairs in an outer circle. It's kind of a fishbowl conversation. The first half, the men, the penis owners, get to speak about their relationships with their penises. And the women in the outer circle just listen. No one interjects. They do submit written questions ahead of time. The second half, the women are allowed to speak, and the men who are, sitting on the floor naked are not allowed to speak, which is hilarious because as men, we're sort of conditioned to always be the loudest voice in the room and always share our opinions. So it's hilarious sometimes to watch guys just listening to women speak and not be able and just want to say something so bad. And then if there's time, we open the conversation across genders at the end. So yeah, and then sometimes we have things called Scar and Tell, which is clothing optional, where people tell the story of how they got their scars. There's Tattoo and Tell, where people tell the stories of why they got a certain tattoo. And I shouldn't take credit for all of these because, I'm part of a collective currently of 4 people and maybe 5 people, I think. God. And everyone kind of has their different niche. And so everyone sort of has their own sort of clothing optional events that they host for different topics.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like a really beautiful way to build community.
It really was. Like, Sex Positive St. Louis for me has been about building the community that I wanted when I was younger, because I was part of the nudist community, I was part of the polyamorous community, I was part of the BDSM community, and they're great, but they were, for the most part, very white, surprisingly straight, not even surprisingly, very cisgender, and very kind of segregated, not necessarily racially, but yeah, definitely racially, but segregated by kink or orientation. Like the nudists were over here and the BDSM people over here and the polyamorous people over here. And there was some overlap, but not a whole lot. And we wanted to create a community for everybody, like, from the most vanilla people who were sex positive to the kinkiest, the polyest, the, most, nudiest, basically for everyone to get together and kind of talk and exchange ideas and support each other, and to see the numbers, like see who is in their community who feels about sex the way they do, because part of why I think we don't have more power and influence, and why a lot of these, insane rules and laws survive is because we all are siloed and think we're the only one and that we don't have a collective voice.
Absolutely. So it's an incredible service in St. Louis that you and your co-founders are providing. And have you seen, so is there a lot, so you said initially that it was very segregated via kink and via race and, those segregations that come in. So since creating this sex positive St. Louis, are you seeing those barriers or those walls break down so that there's more integration across all these different demographics?
Absolutely. And we can't take all the credit for it. We were definitely part of it, but I think a lot of things were happening in the last 10 years kind of at the same time. There's a sex positive coffee house in St. Louis called Shameless Grounds. And anytime a friend or a visiting sex educator is coming through St. Louis, I have to take them to Shameless Grounds. It's like a pilgrimage. So Shameless Grounds, I think, had a lot to do with it. The burlesque explosion nationwide had a lot to do with it. So it was kind of like this amazing piece of like parallel thinking, like 10, 15 years ago, when all of these different kind of trends and groups around alternative sexuality sort of like started bubbling up at the same time. And it's been amazing to watch. And I'm glad that it's not just us, because number one, we can't be all things to all people. And number two, sometimes I like to go to like a clothing optional event or a sex positive event and just be audience or just be a party goer and not be in charge and feel responsible. So I think, and also like as younger people have aged into the scene, I think that's changed a lot. I think it's made it a lot better. It's the scene is younger, it's more queer, it's less, binary gender wise. So I think that's been amazing.
Yeah, beautiful. So I have a question that's bubbling up to the surface, and in terms of workshops that you present, can you teach somebody to be polyamorous? Can you teach somebody, I know you can teach people about ethics and manners, but like, can you teach someone to be polyamorous if they aren't just inherently naturally, not saying that they're like completely not wired that way, but if they're like, I don't know, and I just don't understand, like, can you teach them a recipe or a method of how to function as a polyamorous person?
Yeah, I mean, I think teaching you to be polyamorous is like teaching you to be tall. I don't know that it's something you can teach. I think that if people have an innate desire, if they have an innate orientation toward polyamory, I can help them navigate the pitfalls and how to do it. And I think if people aren't naturally polyamorous, but they are in a polyamorous, monogamous, relationship, like their partner wants to open up and maybe they don't, but they want to stay with their, like, it's not that they don't want their partner to be open, it's that they themselves are happy with one person. That can be very tricky. So yeah, I don't think I can teach anyone to be polyamorous. I think I can teach people who want to be polyamorous how to do it better, and I can teach people how to mitigate the pitfalls and potential damage of polyamory.
So being polyamorous is kind of like, and this may be a horrible analogy, so forgive me, listeners, and forgive me, David, but like, like you don't choose to be gay, you're born gay, right? I didn't choose to be bisexual. I've just always been that way my whole life, right? So in terms of polyamory, it's like an orientation. It's not a top-down process, is what I'm hearing you say. It's more just like inherently within you, you have room for love for more than one person. Because a lot of people, like my experience years ago with polyamory is it was more just like I've said, polyfuckery, right? It's just dudes that want to fuck a lot of chicks, right? And so there's all this, so even if they're like, communicating about the fact that they're fucking 5 other people, it's like the emotional availability of them is not present because it's not really about love. It's about fucking lots of people. So polyamory is about love, right? That's what amorous is. And so it's more than just polyfuckery. It's a capacity to love more than one person in an intimate sexual way.
Well, first of all, shout out to polyfuckery. Ain't nothing wrong with that. Because I think that I am both polyamorous and polyfuckerous, if that to coin a phrase. And also like when you get outside the realm of strict polyamory and talk about open relationships, that can include polyamory, that can include swinging, that can include, hookups, like whatever, and I do feel like there has been like tension within the polyamorous community, whereas like polyamorous people who only have sex within the context of a long-term or committed relationship look down on swingers or look down on people who are just open. And I'm not really for that. Because the thing I tell people when we start dividing ourselves up into little factions, I start telling people, the conservatives want to kill us all. It's not like, they're going to kill the swingers and let the polyamorous people rock.
Swingers.
and I've struggled internally with whether I think polyamory is an orientation. I think it is. I don't put it on the level of being like gay or lesbian or bisexual. I think if there can be like even a spectrum of orientations, like polyamory might be like a rung down from like being gay or bisexual or what have you. But I do think that I was always polyamorous even before I was sexual, even before I was in romantic relationships. When I was, 10 years old, I had a crush on this older girl who ended up dating my best friend, and she was best friends with me. I was best friends with him. They were a couple, and I wasn't having sex back then because I was 10, but we were like effectively working as a triad. And I had a relationship with him. I had a relationship with her. I had a relationship with them as a couple. And there was a lot of sort of like ethical landmines that even as a 10, 11, 12-year-old, I had to learn to navigate. What am I allowed to say to him about her? What am I allowed to say to her about him? Am I helping their relationship or am I hurting it? And I think dealing with things on that level as a 10-year-old kind of made me just predestined to be polyamorous. And something I had to learn in my late teenage years was people that I was in polyamorous relationships with at 18, 19, 20, they didn't have 10 years of experience in those types of relationships. And like I said, there weren't books on the subject back then. There wasn't, polyamorous married and dating on Showtime. There wasn't internet back then. And so I had to realize, okay, if I'm going to continue in these types of relationships, I'm going to have to account for the learning curve for most of the people I'm dating, to where this is the first time they've ever been in an open relationship.
Yeah. So in your polyamorous workshops, what are the skills that you're providing for people, that you're teaching people?
Well, it used to be that I had a syllabus, and I would basically the workshop was basically me like live reading the syllabus. And then I kind of realized this might be new information for them, the audience. It might not, but it's the same information for me over and over again. So it got kind of boring. And also they can just read the syllabus. So I made a decision to distribute the syllabus, but then just take questions and just make it a live Q&A. And that's kind of forced me to stay on my toes and think on my feet. And it's also allowed me to tailor each workshop to the people in the room. Like, what are the needs of the people in the room? And also it gets to use the wisdom of the group, because sometimes there are people in the audience who have a better answer than I do. Because like, for example, I don't have any children that I am completely aware of. And so, when people ask things about polyamorous parenting, there's usually other people in the room who are parents who are polyamorous who can, speak from their experience. But the basic skills that I'm trying to impart on people in I call it Poly 101, it's very entry level, is what I call the 3 C's of polyamory, which are communication, consent, and community. You have to have good communication skills. If you have poor communication skills as a monogamous person, polyamory will not save you. It'll probably make your polyamory way worse. Consent, obviously, honesty, everyone's on the same page. And I talk about community because we need, and this is much easier, I think, in the internet age, but we need support. And we need polyamorous people in our lives, or at least people who understand polyamory, who are open to it, who are sex positive, even if they're monogamous, to be our support network. Because when I, was in a triad at 19, all my friends were monogamous. And anytime I had any problem in my relationship and I tried to talk to my monogamous friends, they always assumed that the problem was that I was in an open relationship. You know, whether that was the problem or not. It's kind of like when you're in an interracial relationship and you talk to your parents and it's like, oh yeah, I'm having some problems with Sheila. That's what you get messing with that white girl. You know, like, they blame everything on the one thing about the relationship that they don't understand. And so having a network of polyamorous people to support you just makes all the difference in the world, because they can see past the polyamory and see the problems and help you deal with them.
Yeah. So those are the skills that you're teaching, the three C's in your workshop. Personal opinion, in your opinion, what is one of the number one keys to practicing polyamory ethically? What is the number one key for you?
Oh God. It's hard to pin it down to one. I would
Give us a variety, a few.
I would say communication, self-awareness, and the ability to mitigate jealousy. And I would say really all those three things overlap. They're all connected. Being able to communicate your needs to your partner, being able to receive your partner communicating their needs to you, making sure that everyone's needs are met, and being self-aware enough to do that, being self-aware enough to receive it, and being self-aware enough to understand the source of your jealousy, where it's really coming from. Because I think that with monogamous people, when they get jealous, and they do, because when you say I'm polyamorous, you know, monogamous people will say, what about jealousy? And it's like, what, you don't have jealousy in your monogamous relationship? And it's like, no, I really do, which is why I can't imagine having more than one. But when monogamous people get jealous, I think they initially blame their partner. Like, I'm jealous because of what you did, and you need to fix this, or you need to not do that, or you need to do this differently. And with polyamorous people, I think it really benefits us to examine where that jealousy is coming from and get to the root of it within ourselves before we communicate with our partners, and recognize whether, okay, is this my shit? Is this something that they're doing? Is it something that they're doing with their partner, their other partner, that I wish they were doing with me? You know, are my needs getting met, or their needs getting met? And so I think that being able to examine jealousy, be self-aware about what your jealousy is, and communicate that lovingly to your partner without, you know, being angry, being accusatory, being able to hear your partner's, you know, concerns about, you know, jealousy without, you know, being defensive. I think those are some of the biggest skill, the most important skills to have in an open relationship.
And do you find we'll just talk about your community, because I know we don't know what's going on in everybody's community, but in the community that you're involved with, is there shaming around jealousy? Because that's something that, you know, that pops up and that I hear about often. It's like, you know, well, you're just jealous kind of thing. And a dismissing of the emotions, as opposed to a willingness to hear and allow them.
I think that in a relationship that is where the communication skills are bad, in a relationship where one of the partners is, I don't want to say abusive, but manipulative, shaming people for jealousy can be a very potent weapon. I think it's akin to gaslighting.
Yeah.
When I feel like there's this expectation that if you're polyamorous, you have conquered jealousy. You're the master of your jealousy. And that can be used against people to justify bad behavior.
Yes.
When someone comes to you with a legitimate reason why they're having issues with jealousy, and you shame them and saying, well, you're bad at polyamory, or you're inhibiting me, or you're doing X, Y, and Z to me. And I think that goes back to think about being able to receive it and not be defensive, and to not look at it as you versus your partner, but you and your partner working together on your relationship to create a win-win where everyone's needs are being met and no one's feeling left out or jealous or hurt. And I also think that there's internal shame with jealousy, because this is something that I experienced with my first wife. Started seeing a guy and they were starting to get more serious, her and her boyfriend. I got really jealous. And at this point, I'm, flying around the country, giving polyamory workshops. And I felt like I had no right to be jealous. So I couldn't admit it.
Yeah.
And so I'm feeling jealousy and I'm bottling it up and not expressing it because I feel ashamed.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife could read me like a book. There was no, pretending or acting with her. So I actually went into therapy. I found a therapist who was polyamorous herself.
Mm-hmm.
And I went into therapy to deal with my jealousy. And she asked me, she said, okay, well, what do you think are the odds that your wife will leave you for this other man? And my initial reaction was 0%. And as soon as I said that out loud, I mean, it didn't cure my jealousy overnight, but saying out loud that I have no fear that my wife is going to leave me just began this, steady decline in my jealousy. And it allowed my wife the space to, enjoy her relationship with her boyfriend.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And so much of these feelings of jealousy and insecurity have to do with our attachment wounds, right? From our early childhood relationships. And so, those come up in monogamous relationships. I'm sure polyamorous relationships are even more fertile ground in some cases for those wounds to arise, to present so that they can be addressed. So I just want to applaud and commend you for knowing that you needed support in your healing process and that you got it.
When I started therapy, my therapist asked me what were the earliest things I could remember? What were my earliest memories from childhood? And they were all feeling abandoned.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I realized, oh, you are polyamorous and you have abandonment issues, which makes perfect sense, but can also be a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, it's such a broad subject because I guess, my experience of having been in polyamorous relationships in ways that are positive and ways that are, were beneficial or detrimental. I have observed in my own experience that it appears that some people may use polyamory as a strategy to avoid addressing some of those deeper wounds, those abandonment wounds, like, okay, well, I'll just have 10 partners so I never have to fear being abandoned. So I've seen it show up in that way as an unhealthy coping mechanism for some of the early childhood wounds.
I call it diversifying your portfolio.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. And at the same time, if it's being actively used as a way of avoiding, those wounds are going to arise. If they're relationship wounds, doesn't matter if you've got 10 relationships, those wounds will arise.
And also, I think it can be not fair to your partners, because when I was in my mid-20s, I was in 2 very serious relationships. And I had 2 primary partners. And I realized that what I was doing was, okay, if I piss off this partner, I can always go be with this one. And then when I piss her off, I can go over here. And things weren't getting dealt with because I had this escape hatch. Exactly. And I realized, no, you have to deal with each of these people as individuals or you're not being fair to them.
Yeah. And so that's exactly what I was speaking to, is that kind of, again, coping mechanism kind of thing to protect ourselves. So, and I will say that I have been in that position and we feel it. I felt it. I was like, you are just trying to avoid showing up for me fully, which then triggers my own attachment wounds and my abandonment wounds. So it's a slippery slope. But I think the point is that whether it's a monogamous relationship or a polyamorous relationship, you're going to have to deal with your shit. Is what it boils down to. Yeah. Yeah.
When you're in a polyamorous relationship, you're going to have multiple people calling you on your shit.
Yeah, exactly. So it can be even more challenging. Yeah. And you have to be up for it. It sounds like have the commitment and the desire for this to actually be an area of your life that's flourishing and not just an area of your life that is feeding avoidance.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of skill and it takes a lot of self-awareness, like I said, because, if you're a monogamous person and you're having relationship issues and you have those, that really difficult conversation with your partner that you dread, but it needs to happen. Well, if you're polyamorous, you might have to have that conversation 2 or 3 times in the same week.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have to be self-aware, and you can't use it as an escape hatch. You can't use it as an avoidance mechanism. You can diversify your portfolio, but you have to manage each aspect of your portfolio.
In learning about polyamory, has it been your understanding that many indigenous communities practiced polyamory? Like, so I remember, watching specials and stuff about some of the South American tribes and some of the African tribes that are more matriarchal or egalitarian, and how it's just kind of normal. You just kind of play with other people. It's a normal, natural thing. So has that been in your research and your practicing of polyamory, has that been influenced you in any way? Or is that
Oh,
your
absolutely.
understanding?
I look at, I'm not an anthropologist by any stretch of the imagination, but I do look at other societies. I look at the animal kingdom. We haven't all, but many of us have read Sex at Dawn. Many of us who follow Dr. Susan, her bonobo tribe. We recognize that monogamy is really relatively new concept for in a lot of areas, and that it's oftentimes as much about finances and the economic system, the social system of your society, that monogamy takes hold. It's not something that is necessarily innate in us. It's something that we've adapted to because of the conditions. And what I see a lot of the younger people, like younger millennials, Gen Z, there's a meme floating around that says, monogamy in this economy, we used to look at polyamory as, a very upper middle class, privileged thing for people who could afford to wine and dine and woo multiple people. And I think a lot of the younger generation is like, yeah, it's going to take 3 or 4 incomes just to pay the mortgage. So why not be a quad and share expenses and share resources?
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I love that. I love that transformation. Yeah. Wow. Well, and how awesome as we move into kind of this new paradigm of relationship and living, to have resources such as yourself to help guide us in our ethical and integrous practice of polyamory, BDSM, kink, all of the beautiful offerings that you share. So our time is up today. Unfortunately, it has been delightful connecting with you and picking your brain, learning more about you. Can you share again your website URL and how people can get a hold of you to teach classes in their area?
Okay, but before I plug myself, Davey, I just want to say it's been a delight. The time has flown by. I'm a huge fan of your work and your podcast, and the online classes that you offered in the early days of the pandemic really meant a lot to myself and my current wife. So thank you. You're amazing.
It's such an honor.
And people can find me at davidwraith.com. And I'm either David Wraith or Planet Wraith on all the socials, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And if you go to davidwraith.com, there's a tab that says book me. It has my classes. You can get a hold of me through my website. And once I'm fully vaccinated, and with after a year and a half of not traveling, we're open for business. I can't wait to get back out there and do some in-person workshops again.
Awesome. And thank you for being such an ethical provider in the field. I mean, there's a lot of abuse and there's a lot of brilliance. And so it's just an honor to present you to the world as a brilliant star in this field. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much, David. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you were titillated by this conversation. Please be sure to check out David Wraith at davidwraith.com and book him for an event in your area. Have you ever been to Canada as of yet, David?
I've been to Canada twice. I presented twice in Vancouver and absolutely loved it.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm in Kelowna, BC, and we might need to set up some workshops for you here.
Oh, that'd be great. That'd be wonderful.
Right on. All right. So y'all keep an eye out for that. Much love, many blessings. Have a great week. And tune in next week for Sex is Medicine. You've been listening to Sex is Medicine with Davey Ward Erickson, your #1 resource for holistic sex education. You can listen to and subscribe to Sex is Medicine on Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. Just search Sex is Medicine with Davey Ward. Stay connected with me and my guests on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Authentic Tantra. and learn how you can use Tantra as medicine to heal, awaken, and empower every area of your life at authentictantra.com. Make sure to tune in to Sex is Medicine every Thursday at 7 p.m. Pacific on Contact Talk Radio Network, and join our watch party every Thursday evening on Facebook at Authentic Tantra. We look forward to you joining us next week for another episode of Sex is Medicine with Davey Ward.